Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today I will continue the series on the Semi-Slav with the Meran variation or variations, the most important part of the Semi-Slav defense. Sorry for no theoretical video yesterday. Lucia and I have been moving into the new flat. We got our stuff from IKEA and then one item came in damaged and we ordered it to be delivered because we don't have a car, and then we ended up having to go there to replace the stuff, and then we spent the whole day drilling, assembling furniture, cleaning, buying stuff, and well, just moving in. So a lot of work. I really didn't manage to record or to do anything. I didn't have a desk. I'm still at I'm staying at my parents' place to record now, and hopefully starting tomorrow I'll be able to record from my own place. Okay, so the Meran variation. Let's just show the starting moves of the Semi-Slav. So d4, d5, the queen's gambit with c4, black plays c6, this is now the Slav, but after knight f3, knight f6, knight c3 and e6, this is now the Semi-Slav because black has closed in his Semi-Slav triangle of pawns. So when black plays e6 and c6, we have the Semi-Slav defense. And today we are going to be focusing on the move e3, which can lead either to Meran or anti-Meran variations. What does that mean? After black's one and only move knight b to d7, sort of a waiting move, not releasing the tension on c4 and waiting for white to develop his bishop, white now has to make a decision, either develop the bishop or not develop the bishop. If he develops the bishop, the most sensible square is d3, from which the bishop can be used as a tempo gain with d takes c4 and thus entering the Meran variation. Or white can opt for the move queen c2, going for anti-Merans, avoiding this exchange. In this video we are going to be looking at the Meran variation or variations starting after bishop d3. D takes c4, a tempo on the bishop now has to take, and black plays the move b5. This is our starting position, and this is the most thematic position in the Semi-Slav defense. Why does black do that? Well, white obviously wants to castle, and the move e3 is preparing castling. In order to castle, white still has to move the bishop away from f1. As soon as he does that, either to e2 or to d3, although there's a difference, black has a more favorable situation on the board when it comes to taking the c4 pawn, because after knight bd7, bishop d3, once black takes on c4, the bishop, when it recaptures, will have moved twice, first from f1 to d3, then from d3 to c4. So black basically got in a move for free, and white had to move his bishop twice. And why the move b5? Well, the move b5 is working towards resolving the biggest problem black has in the Semi-Slav defense, his light-squared bishop on c8. This bishop is a dead piece, and very often when inexperienced players play the Semi-Slav, this bishop ends up behind its pawn triangle and remains dead for the end of the game. So the move b5 prepares to liberate that bishop. Now how? b5 in itself might seem like a weakening move gaining a tempo on the bishop, but black is going to follow that up with the move c5, and once c5 comes, which is for the moment defended twice by the d7 knight and by the f8 bishop, when the c5 move is played, when this liberating break is played, the bishop is going to come to b7 and be the best piece on the board. Trust me, I've won and lost countless games because of this bishop. Now, we are going to look at three options for white. All three are completely different, all three are very interesting, and you have to know all three as black. The most common move is bishop d3. This is bread and butter of the Semi-Slav, bishop d3, and you know that you are going to play a very theory-heavy variation. The other move we are going to be looking at is the move bishop e2, which does make a difference because the queen is now open on the d-file. And finally, we are going to be looking at a very aggressive option for white, the move bishop b3, which keeps the bishop on this long diagonal and stares at the e6 pawn and at the f7 pawn. So in conjunction with the knights, which can wander to these two squares, so g5 and coming to attack the black king, this could be fairly deadly. So let's look at bishop b3 first and leave bishop d3 for last, because that has the most theory. So the move bishop b3. Now, in the normal bishop d3 lines, black can either continue with bishop b7 or a6. a6 is the old way to play and my preferred method of playing. You play a6 to make sure that when you play the move c5, your b5 pawn is defended. It's as simple as that. So a6 is a very necessary move. The same thing goes for bishop e2. You still go for bishop b7 and prepare to fianchetto, prepare for c5. Against bishop b3, you need to be slightly more careful. If you now continue with bishop b7 or a6, you are still fine, but you could get in trouble much faster. And I'm going to show you that. Let's say a6 is played, going for normal c5s. Castles, and if you try c5 now, well then d5, c4, d takes e6, f takes e6, bishop c2 and bishop b7, and you have something resembling one of the main lines, as we are going to see, which is slightly loose for black, and this is the best black could get if he goes for a6, c5. One more thing, after a6, if white castles, which he's going to do, if you now play bishop b7, now you are far too slow, and this is in fact now losing for black. Believe it or not, this is move 9. Black is playing very thematic plans for the Semi-Slav, but he's already in trouble after e4, which white is always going to do in anticipation of c5. c5, e5. Now after c takes d4, queen takes d4, bishop c5 gaining a tempo on the queen, and queen f4, black's game is busted. Black doesn't have a retreat square for the knight, and white is winning. If I turn on the engine, you can see that it's +2 for white. So after bishop b3, you have to be careful. You cannot go for the normal Semi-Slav plans. That's the second thing you need to know in Meran variations. One thing is this plan with b5, gaining a tempo on the bishop, and then a6, bishop b7, c5, or bishop b7, a6, c5. And the other thing is playing against this move bishop b3. This is a unique line, and you need to have something prepared against that. The way you punish the move bishop b3, which doesn't leave bishop on this diagonal or on this diagonal near to the king, you play the move b4, chasing the knight away. And now there is one common mistake which white has been known to play, and that's the move knight a4. After knight a4, you can see that black's game is very good, better for black. You play the move bishop a6 to make sure you prevent white from castling, and this is a common trick and the common mistake players with white actually make, because after the move b4, it seems fairly logical to play knight a4 because you are trying to stop c5, but when this move bishop a6 come in, black is better. There is a way to fight that. Bishop d2, c5 achieved, so the bishop is going to be able to return if need be. dc5, knight c5, bishop c5, and now bishop a4 check. You don't really want to play knight d7. You give away your castling rights as well with king f8. But these two bishops are much better than white's two bishops. In fact, the white king doesn't have a single escape square at the moment, and one tactical mistake could mean trouble. So after bishop b3, b4, white's only move is knight e2. You retreat the knight, you make sure you can still castle, and black now continues with bishop b7. Castles, bishop d6, most active diagonal, knight f4, and now we come to the point I was talking about. These two knights are going to be looking at the e6 square, and this bishop on b3, the knight on g5 and the knight on f4 are all going to be putting pressure on e6, and you have to be extremely careful. One rule is castle as quickly as you can, but then as soon as the f3 knight goes to g5, just take on f4. There's nothing better to do here. Take on f4, get rid of that knight, give up your bishop, and play a safe game. If you play something like queen c7, a very sensible move, you in fact lose the game. Just knight takes any knight, but knight f I think is better. Knight takes e6, pawn takes e6, knight takes e6, and you can see that this is coming with a discovery, and black is busted. This is +3 for white. So after the move knight g5, remember to just get rid of the f4 knight. So bishop takes f4, e takes f4. Once you've done that, continue with your normal plan. No problems here. Black is better in this position. The engine is going to tell you that it's at least equal for black. c5, break open the position. Bishop e3 should be played, which is the best move. h6, chase the knight away. Knight f3, rook c8. No problems here for black. A perfectly solid playable position. enjoyable, in fact. A lot of weak squares, d5, e4. Your bishop is a monster. Your knight has these squares as well. You can do something like knight e5, knight d2, f6. You can play c4. You can play a5, a4. You can most often create a pawn majority on the queen side if black is not careful. And if black takes, well, so what? Takes, and the bishop is on pre. White has to do something about that. So the move bishop b3, one thing you have to know, you cannot go for a6, c5. Play energetically, b4. And if white plays the mistake knight a4, remember bishop a6. If knight e2 is played coming into f4 and the other knight coming into g5, remember to develop your bishop to d6. You need your bishop here to take on f4, and once the knight gets to f4, eliminate it. Okay, now let's look at the move bishop e2. This is the second most common way to play the Meran for white. Bishop b7 should be black's move, simply going for the same plan of a6 and pushing c5. Castles, and now two positions are possible from here. And black has two possibilities. One of them is a6, which allows the early e4. And the other one is simpler, bishop e7, which I wouldn't recommend, but that's theoretically the preferred move. After bishop e7, white still plays e4, and now you don't continue with c5 or a6, you continue with b4, playing as if the bishop was on b3. And now this tricky line that we are often going to see in the Meran Semi-Slav, a position in which both knights get attacked, e5. And in this particular position, if you are playing against bishop e2, when the queen is on d1, open on this diagonal, what you want to do is take on c3, white is going to take on f6, and you simply recapture with the bishop. Taking on b2 doesn't work, if I turn on the engine, because your queen gets attacked. And, well, you do get the new queen, but after takes here, this is with check, you have to recapture with the rook, and now white has a fairly easy game, something like, yeah, queen b3, and white is just winning. If you count the material, black is down a whole piece and no compensation at all. So, after the move e5, you take on c3, but when white takes on f6, you simply recapture with the bishop and allow this to happen, bc3. And now once again, once you've done that, c5, open up your bishop. You want your bishop to be alive. Every time you play the Semi-Slav, you need to think of your bishop most than any other piece. dc5, castles, you're going to recapture that pawn in a minute. Bishop a3, bishop e7, queen d4 trying to cling on to the pawn, but now rook c8. And now c6, you take with the rook, allowing this capture to happen. This is not a problem, and when this happens, c4, you can see that white is a pawn up, but that pawn is just about to drop with something like bishop a6, a perfectly equal position. And that's exactly why after in bishop e2 positions, after bishop b7 castles, I don't recommend the move bishop e7. I don't think there's enough for black there. I recommend a6. And after e4, go for c5. And this is now going to resemble the main lines with bishop d3, with one exception, that the bishop is on e2. e5, and now you don't take here, that would be a horrible mistake. You play knight d5, and now white needs to play aggressively. This is much trickier for white than the line we just saw with bishop e7. White needs to play the move a4, trying to break open the structure and provoking this pawn forward. Knight e4, queen c7, defending your pawn. Rook e1, h6, stopping anything from coming into g5. b3, stopping c4, which, well, yeah, was a very good move. I just want to point out that if rook e1, if you play the move c4 now, you could be in trouble with the move knight g5, which, well, can lead to all sorts of sacrifices here, and it's not safe to play this position. So remember that after the move rook e1, you don't have time for c4, however tempting that might be, because if knight g5, h6, he's just going to take on f7 or on e6, and you're going to be dead lost, so h6. b3, and now bishop e7, developing bishop b2, castles, rook c1, rook a c8, knight fd2, knight f4. A perfectly playable position for black. White is slightly better in these lines according to the engine, and you do have trouble pushing your pawn forward to c4. But in any endgame, this structure is unfavorable for white because he has this backwards d4 pawn. So very often, if you manage to trade off the pieces, and black should be the one trading off the pieces here, you're going to have a favorable pawn structure with a clear target on d4. But this move bishop e2, in my experience, you are almost never going to see. This is a very rare move which white... I'm sorry about this. Which white plays very rarely, and way more common is the attacking bishop b3 or the main line bishop d3, which we are going to be looking at now. Now, there are two ways to play against bishop d3, the old way and the new way. I want to go over the new way first because I don't like it as much, and that's bishop b7 before a6. After bishop b7, white castles or plays e4. The usual rule is, if you go bishop b7 first, white should castle. If you play a6 first, white should play e4. Remember that as white. Now let's look at e4 first, after bishop b7, which is also playable, but now black doesn't have time for a6, c5, that's way too slow. If a6, just e5 and white is better. So b4, chase the knight away, knight a4, and now c5. You need to play energetically if this happens on the board. e5, knight d5, and now we have something resembling the position with bishop e2, but with the bishop on d3. The difference is that the queen is not controlling the d file. Castles, cd4, rook e1, g6, bishop g5, queen a5, and these lines can be very tricky. So, if you encounter after bishop d3 and you play bishop b7, if white immediately goes for the move e4, I like the positions for white. I don't like the fact that black has to overextend that much. That is why I prefer the move a6. But let's finish this line. So cd4, rook e1, g6, bishop g5, queen a5, knight takes d4, a6, a3, ba3, ba3, bishop g7, bishop d2, and now queen d8, rook b1. Here, this is a temporary exchange sacrifice that white can play. This is very theoretical, and this is one more reason why I don't like the move bishop b7, rook b8, and now rook b7, bishop a6, rook c7, and bishop a5. And white is about to regain his material. He's going to have a weak passed pawn on the a file, which you are going to be able to capture, or you're going to be able to capture on e5, but still, these lines can be very tricky. And if you don't know exactly what you're doing with black, you can lose the game very fast. But as I said, after bishop b7, the usual way to play and the more common move is castles. And now you can continue with a6, e4, c5, and now d5 is the main move for white. After d5, you ignore this, play queen c7, and d6, f6, bishop c2. A pawn majority for black on the queen side, a weakness on e6, which is going to have to be defended, something like bishop d6 and going for the move, stopping the move e5, knight g5, attacking this pawn, knight f8, f4, and yeah, white is very aggressive here. White has more chances, I would say. In any endgame, black is undoubtedly better because of his pawn majority on the queen side, but white is the one on the attack here. I'm not saying that black doesn't have chances. Black can checkmate white if white isn't careful, but I like the positions for white. So that's why we are going to focus on the main line of the Meran. After bishop d3, the move a6. And this is what I play, this is what most people still play, and this, I would say, is a more solid move. As I said, the idea behind a6 is simply to defend b5 before pushing c5 through. And now, if white goes for castling, I just want to point that out, this move is really slow. When a6 is played, white has to play the move e4. If white castles, black is strategically winning here. Just c5, before e4 happens, so you have an extra move, basically. Castling is irrelevant here. And now white needs to go for very aggressive stuff like a4 and b4, knight e4, bishop b7, knight f6, dc5, bishop c5. You can see that these bishops are just dream bishops. Black has everything in this position, and it's just much better. It's not lost for white, but it's much better for black. So after the move a6, white needs to continue with e4. And now, as I said, if you play something passive as black, you are going to lose the game. You need to play c5. This is your main break in the position. And here we come to the main position of the Meran Semi-Slav, the crossroads for white, and at which he can either play the move d5. d5 is the Reynolds attack, or he can play the move e5. e5 is the old way to play the old Meran, and after c5, these two moves are what you have to learn most. These two moves you need to perfect as black. I've played one training game against an international master, Matt Bobola, which you can find on the channel. I think he played the move e5, and we played about 15 more moves of theory, so I know it pretty well. He knew it better and won. Let's look at d5 first. d5 simply aims to take on e6 and weaken this pawn. So c4, this is the main move. The white bishop can retreat to c2 immediately, but this is the more common way to play. Takes, and now bishop c2, queen c7, and now once more black is going for a long-term structural advantage with his very solid pawn chain on the queen side in exchange for a weakness here. Castles, bishop b7, knight to d4 putting pressure on e6, knight c5 defending, bishop e3, e5 chasing the knight away, knight f5, and now unfortunately you have to know all of this. I'm sorry to say that, but this you just have to know if you want to play the Semi-Slav on any normal level, let's say above 1700. g6, knight h6, bishop g7, and black is going to castle queenside. I would just like to point that out. Queen f3, putting pressure on the knight, knight e6, queen h3, and now queen d7. Rook somewhere on the d file doesn't really work because of knight d4. It's still one of the most common moves, rook a1 and now knight d4. White should decline the queen trade, queen h4, and now castles queenside. And this is our starting position. Here you have to stop and think and find plans, and you basically have to prepare this position at home. Each side has 6 pawns. Each side has equal material. All the pieces are still on the board, which means that black is going to have a hard time defending this because all of the pieces are on the board. White's knight is misplaced, that's one thing, but white still has the bishop pair, and white still has a few very aggressive options. So this is something you have to work on by yourself if you want to play the Semi-Slav. So from this position on, from move 21, you need to know at least 5 or 10 more moves, or at least plans in the middle game. Okay, and after c5, the move e5 is the old way to play. Now we come to a position in which both sides can attack the knight once again. That's the main move, cd4. Okay, cd4. And now white's best move is not to take the knight here. That would be, in fact, a blunder if white takes on f6. If you take on f6, just pawn takes knight. And if you try to take here, then bishop takes and your pawn can be regained with check. Black is winning this position. So after e5, c takes d4. White goes for a very tricky move, and this is what I played against Matt Bobola. This variation, I had the black pieces. Black has to take on b5. White has to take on b5, I'm sorry. And now we're going to be looking at 2 moves. One move which I don't like, and one move which I like. So you can take the knight immediately. That's the best move, and that's the most theoretical move. Or you can take on e5. And this I'm showing you because I have been preparing it for a tournament game to surprise my opponent. This move is very tricky, and after knight takes knight, a takes b5, bishop takes b5 check, you play bishop d7, and after knight takes d7 you play queen a5 check, bishop d2, you take the light squared bishop, knight takes f8, you take with the king, and now after a4, both sides have 5 pawns, but first thing, white needs to find all of these moves. White has 2 connected passed pawns, and black has a very advanced passed pawn on the d4 square, so it's imbalanced but equal. But if you are trying to surprise somebody, this might be the way to go. Queen takes b2, white castles, knight e4 attacking the bishop, bishop f4, and now we continue with knight c3 attacking the queen. This cannot be taken because knight check wins the queen, so queen f3 is going to be played, king e7. And from here on, black is a pawn up. black has a passed pawn, white has a passed pawn. If white plays perfectly, this is what you get. The engine says it's better for white, but show me how. Show me how. From a human perspective, this is hard to play for white. Okay, and let's look at the main move. After knight takes b5, of course, a takes b5 is the main line, e takes f6, and black always recaptures with the pawn. Always recaptures with the pawn. Taking with the knight or with the queen is far too loose. Take with the queen, you could get in trouble with bishop b5, and then d4 is dropping. Take with the knight, bishop b5 is check, so that doesn't work. You take with the g-pawn. And now we are going to look at two mistakes first. So you might be wondering, well, two pawns are attacked, white is going to take one. No. If white takes on b5, a fairly simple tactic, queen a5 check wins the bishop. And after gf6, if white takes on d4, it's a bit harder to prove why this is a mistake, but I'm going to show you why now. Queen b6, attacking the knight. Bishop e3, defending the knight. Bishop b4 check with tempo. King f1. The king doesn't have any other squares. If the bishop retreats, queen takes knight. Bishop c5, double threat on the knight. Bishop e2, defending the knight. And now b4, saving the pawn finally. And now b4 saving the pawn. And you can see that white's position is under tons of pressure. And it's not easy to defend this. The engine gives this as only -half or -1 for black. But I think it's way, way more the best move. If it's a4 and you can take en passant, then, I mean, too much pressure on the white position. So in this position, after e takes f6, g takes f6, white shouldn't try to defend the pawns or take the pawns, I'm sorry. White should just castle, get rid of all the trouble, and allow queen b6, defending both. Queen e2, b4 saving the pawn, rook d1, bishop c5, and all of these moves were played by Matt Bobble and me still. If you want, you can find the game on the channel. We had this position on the board. So this is now move 15, still theory. Bishop f4, h5, rook ac1, king f8, bishop b5, king g7. You can see that black's position is slightly unusual, well, as it often happens in the Semi-Slav, but black is a pawn up, as it often happens in the Semi-Slav. If you want to play the Semi-Slav, you have to be prepared for stuff like this. You have to be prepared for aggressive games, imbalanced games, your king running around like crazy, and your pieces being on weird places. You have to accept that. So once again, after d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, e6, e3 is the main move, knight bd7, bishop d3, and now dc4, bishop c4, b5 is the Meran. White can play either bishop b3 aggressively, bishop d3 the main move, or bishop e2. You're going to be seeing bishop d3 99% of the time. Now decide whether you want to play a6 or bishop b7. The choice is yours. And from there on, one thing I would like to highlight here, Alexei Dreyev, Meran and Anti-Meran, the best book on this opening, and his games, 20 years of experience. Study Alexei Dreyev's games. Thank you very much. Sorry for the long theoretical video. It's just my favorite opening, and I wanted to share my experience and my knowledge with you. I hope I managed to do that. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.